Anyway, we have a great program today. I have been so looking forward to this, and I was privileged to see some of the little preview clips that Diane Podolsky has for us. And I want to tell you a little bit about Diane. So first off, and most importantly, she's a member of the Plastic Club, and she has been part of our community since about 2006, and she is credited with starting the Plastic Club salons, which always makes her laugh because she says that what we call a salon today is far more genteel than the brawl sessions that she describes when they first started. Anyway, Diane is a very accomplished artist, and she works mainly in paper, doing mixed media, printmaking, book arts. She has many, many solo exhibits. She also has many two-person shows in invitational exhibits. She's involved with public arts projects. And the one that she's involved with right this minute is called Raise Your Voice Mural Project with the Hickory Museum of Art in Hickory, North Carolina, which is near where she lives today. Her work has been reviewed in the Philadelphia Inquirer, and her work is also in collections such as the LaSalle University Art Museum, Swarthmore College, and the Free Library of Philadelphia. So I think you have an idea of her accomplishments. She's also teaches, and she's very generous with what she knows, which I appreciate. Diana is also a master gardener, and she's a master naturalist. So you'll see how botany and the natural world is represented in her art, which you can see at her website, which we should put that up, somebody, anniepodart.com. If you haven't seen it yet, it's also linked on the description of this event at the Plastic Club website. And you'll also see how it relates to the fabulous program that she has for us today. So I will turn the program over to Diane, and I'm going to suggest that we all put ourselves on mute and listen to what Diane has. And if you have a question, Tina and Laura, go to the chat with your questions for right now. Is that a yes? Go to chat? Yeah.
Yeah, if you have any questions, you can type them in the chat.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put myself on mute as well, and take it away, Diane.
Hi, everybody. And Susan, thank you for that very, very kind introduction. And the reason that I came up with this concept of printing from things you have around the house has to do with teaching in the Philadelphia Public Schools as an artist in residence. A lot of those schools did not have supply budgets. They certainly did not have presses. And the few times I've come across a press in a school, it usually was broke. So we had to get pretty creative. And that is how this method of printing was developed. I'm sure there are other people doing similar things. A lot of times it's called kitchen table printmaking. And I've seen people do lithography using these kinds of methods. And that maybe at some point I can find those links and the Plastic Club can post them. But let's get started. Bob, would you show the first slide, please? Thank you. Okay, so this is to say that we are all born printmakers. This is my favorite printmaker. It's my daughter. And I do feel that aside from the logical reasons that hospitals do this, I do feel that people feel a need to make their mark. And this, of course, is probably one of the first marks we've made. So I always like to start off my printing discussions with this image. Bob, would you go to the next slide? Okay, so I want to stress that we are not necessarily focusing on high-end art materials. Yes, if you have ink and a press and brayers, that's wonderful, but most people do not. So what I have pictured here are kind of things that you might have around the house. I do like to say that the dollar store is your friend and the supermarket is your friend, because you in normal times, if you can go to the dollar store now or when you can, there's a lot of things there that make wonderful textures, shelf paper and just all kinds of things. So really start thinking out of the box. So what we have here are just some very basic supplies. And I want to stress that when I did the demonstrations for this project, I used paint because that is what most people have around the house. So what you see in the upper left corner is some Crayola paint, and Crayola is a great product. And right now, a lot of Crayola products are on sale because it is technically back to school time. So their watercolors, their paints, their crayons, perfectly fine to use for these techniques. I also have some ink pad ink, and I have archival ink. We could talk a little bit about that more when we get to that. But if you have ink pads around, going to the right top, we have, I did show you a brayer because if you have one, fine. If not, if you have just an old paintbrush, cosmetic sponges, again, something available in your supermarket, great to have. And lower, you'll see just some extra supplies to have. It's good to have some wax paper because that is a great disposable palette. Rags, paper towels, tweezers are good if you have little tiny things you're picking up, and a spoon if you want to use that to rub on the image that you're printing. You'll see in the demonstrations, I've just used my hands a lot, but it's good to have an old spoon. So that kind of just gives you an idea of what we're really talking about, very bare bones supplies. So Bob, could you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So I am urging all of you to become what I call a texture detective. And what I did was one morning, I just took a walk around where I live and tried to spot some textures. So these are all things that you could find. They are drain spouts, trees, lamppost. The thing with the holes is a stop sign post. And you wonder, like, well, how can I print these? I can't bring these into my house. Well, we're going to show you how you can print these. Let's go to the next slide, Bob. Here are some more things that you might find around your neighborhood. That's the air conditioner on the top right. That's the air conditioner fan outside my apartment. There are sidewalk weeds. Below the sidewalk weeds are a utility grating, the covers of utility gratings. Next to that is some lawn furniture. Above that is a tire. And my favorite image here is the top left. They are what is on our storm drains here. So they put these pictures of fish on to show, to remind people not to throw waste that could damage the fish down the storm drain. So that is what I call being a texture detective. And I urge all of you right now to, if you have shoes on, especially if you have sneakers on, to look at the bottom of your shoes, because some of the greatest textures are on the bottoms of sneakers. And I have entertained classrooms of kids for quite a long time doing sneaker prints. And again, how do you print all this stuff? Well, we're going to show you a video. And what you're going to need is you're going to need crayons and paper, and that's pretty much it. And Bob, do you want to start the video and I will talk over it? So you need to peel your crayons, which might break your heart, but you have to do that. And you want to use the side of the crayon, not the tip of the crayon. Definitely the side of the crayon. And when you take your texture, obviously on leaves, there's the veiny sides. You want them to be where you're going to rub, so a texture comes out. And right now I have to give my husband credit for making all these videos, and he was a great sport about it, and he never even took a picture with a cell phone before this, so I give him credit. So you see what happens when you make your rubbing. And now I'm just taking some netting from a bag of vegetables, a bag of potatoes or onions or whatever it was, same thing, side of the crayon. And what I'm doing is building up layers over one another. You could think about your composition. I'll be honest, I'm not thinking too much about it while I'm doing this because I'm just trying to concentrate on the demonstration. So that's the bottom of my slipper, which, well, you'll see what's going to be on there. They're wonderful. These are my brand new slippers. And I was delighted to see this, but they have little acorns on the bottom of them. So I'm taking a rubbing of that, and now we're going to do some magic. We're going to take some watercolor, and again, just, oh no, I spoke too soon. I'm taking some string. I did a lot more of these than I thought I did. And shoelaces, and again, just seeing what happens. The wonderful thing about printing is you really just never know what you're going to get. So that's a lot of fun. So now we're going to do some magic, I think. Looks like I'm having some problems there. So we're going to take some watercolors and see what happens when you do watercolor over a wax crayon. This is the magic, and this is a wax resist. And you'll get a really, really beautiful effect. Oh, I'm going to show you a white crayon too. So, because people avoid the white crayons because they think, well, that's not going to show up, but you'll see. So we're going to go over that with some dark paint, and you see how the white shows up. So don't avoid your white crayon just because you don't think it's going to show up. So that's some wonderful magic, and they're a lot of fun to do. I say they're fun to do with kids, but adults get a big kick out of this too. And the technical name for this art form is called Frittage, and it's probably the oldest form of printmaking in the United Kingdom. It is a very high art form. People go and take rubbings of gravestones and other historical markers. And you can make something very simple or something very complex just using crayons and watercolor. What I do not suggest, if you have oil pastel, I do not suggest that because they're really too soft. You really want a very hard crayon. So oil pastels would work, but they would not give you the crisp image, like for those veins of the leaf, would not come out as good with an oil pastel. So can we go, is there any questions about this? Laura, do you want to see if there's any questions people have about this technique?
Yeah, Elke asks, what kind of paper are you using?
Okay, so for this presentation, I am using computer paper because again, it's what most people have around, and I am a paper fanatic. I have all kinds of paper, but what most people have is computer paper. You can also use tissue paper, old paper bags. If you use something like tissue paper, it is not as strong as other paper, and you might not want a watercolor on top of that, but you can experiment. But there's no need to go to any great expense to make this kind of art. So, any other questions?
There are no more questions in the chat.
Okay, we can go to the next slide. Thank you. Okay, so now we're moving on to, let's see. Okay, so now we're moving on to things we have in the kitchen. So what I have here is obviously an assortment of vegetables. I have corn, I have the bottom of celery and onion. I have some okra, which is very popular where I live, and some rosemary. And I'd like you to look at the two images more at the bottom. And I know they're a little small, but the one on the bottom right, can anybody guess what that might be? I'll give anybody want to take a guess in the chat. And Laura, you let me know if anybody, and if they don't, I will speak up in a moment.
Okay, we have a few guesses.
Yes. Yeah, thank you, Bob, for enlarging that. So the bottom right is a Brussels sprout, halved in half is a Brussels sprout, and that's what it looked like after I printed it. On the left there, there are some blue images in the middle of each print. If you see the blue, that's actually a fishbone from a smelt, I think. I'll print anything. I'll try anything. I figure I've got nothing to lose. So this shows you how things in your refrigerator can be used to make wonderful textures. Now, I will tell you something about printing vegetables. They are better when they're a little dried out. So if you know you're going to do this the next day, say, take them out the night before, not the fish, because that'll stink, but take out your corn or your celery and dry it off pretty good with a paper towel and let it sit out and dry out, because what happens is the water from the vegetable will sort of loosen your paint, and if you're using ink, it would definitely loosen your ink. So you just kind of want to make sure they're dry. Any questions about this material so far? Laura, is there any thing you see on this? We could go to the next slide if there's not.
We have a question from Susan,
Oh, okay.
I think. Susan, you're muted.
Right, it's easier. I can't type fast. It's easier for me to ask. I'm looking at the beautiful Brussels sprout. That looks like an ink. Would that be an ink? Because it has that nice crisp look to it.
That probably is ink, because I've had that for a couple of years now. And when I do print by myself, I do use ink because I have it and I'm a printmaker. So but there's no reason why you couldn't get a crisp print with paint. It has to do with how you apply it. And we'll talk a little about that in a minute. Are there any other questions?
No questions.
Okay. Okay, next slide, Bob. So let's talk a minute about how to use the vegetables or whatever it is. Does anybody have any idea what, this is one vegetable that's been printed, but it's been printed 5 different ways, maybe 6 different ways. Anybody have a guess what this might be? You didn't know you were going to get a quiz today, but you're getting a quiz. Anybody have an idea what this might be? And I'll give you a hint. Somebody, yes, very good. Oh, that's my daughter. I'm so proud. Yes, so this is celery printed 5 different ways. And at the top left, you have the leaves printed. And then you have a cut piece of celery, like that little crescent shape. The bottom left is the rosette. The middle one, the railroad track looking one is, well, it's hard to describe, but it's, let's put it this way. The last image to the right is if you took the back of the celery and rolled it, this would be the other side. So I'm not describing this very well. I probably should have a piece of celery with me, but I'll let you use your imagination. So don't think of just printing a vegetable one way or whatever you're holding in your hand. There's lots of ways you can do it. Next slide, please. Or are we on our video now? Oh, okay. Here's another one. This has several things. This is another pop quiz. Any guesses on this? There is some okra, yes. There's some okra, and there's actually okra printed 2 different ways. The little circle, blue circles are okra, and the red things in the background that kind of look like fish, that's okra printed going lengthwise. Rosemary, very good.
Corn.
And corn husk, great, you're all great detectives, you're great texture detectives. Yeah, so like corn, you could print the corn, but you can also print the husk. So again, really think broadly when you think about these things. Any other questions about this? Because I think we're going to go to a video. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. I'm wrong. So now, aside from vegetables, we're going to talk about junk you may have around the house. And excuse me, I need to take a sip of something here. So I will admit I used to have, when I taught this a lot, I had a lot more junk than I held on to. So I'm pretty bare bones here, but you'll notice there's the top of a sewing spool and a piece of cardboard and netting from a vegetable bag. There's a shoelace, some string, a piece of lace, a piece of hardware, a bird feather, which I will have to make a disclaimer about that in a moment, an eraser. The cosmetic sponge is at the very top, stained with some paint. Aside from using that to apply your paint, you can also just print with that by stamping it. So before we go on to show you how you use all of this junk and food, I just want to say something about bird feathers. It is technically illegal to collect bird feathers. If you were to pick one up and print with it, I just urge you to wash it off and put it back outside so the feather police don't come. And I'm just obligated to tell you that. So there, I've made my case. So could we go on to the video? So thank you, Bob. So here I am, and I'm inking up some corn. And what I'm trying to show here is what you really want. I'm going 2 colors. What you really want is less. You don't want a lot of paint, because if you start blobbing on paint or ink, you really can't pick up the texture. So with this method, less is always more, and that doesn't look like a whole lot now, but what's going to happen is we are going to build up a print just by layering textures and colors over one another. So there's our celery rosette, and that may have been a little watery because the color's not coming out real bright, but you know, it's still making a mark, so we're getting somewhere. And let's see, what else did I do? Oh, the spool. Now, spools are kind of fun because you could put a drinking straw through the middle of that spool and roll the spool in some paint and then roll it along your paper. I had thread on that spool, so I did not want to do that. So here we go. So yes, and I just saw somebody was saying this is, yes, this is mainly, you are mainly stamping as opposed to taking an imprint with the rubbing method. So this is stamping. And one I got a little too much ink on, you could see, but that's okay. I mean, sometimes you might like that, the cardboard. The thing about demonstrations, I'm going to be honest, I don't put a whole lot of thought into composition when I do these. I'm just trying to show what could be done. So, but you know, that's not stopping you from thinking about making a nice composition, or maybe even cutting out parts of the print and using it as collage material if you want. A lot of people were doing that with the sneaker prints. We'd make a whole lot of sneaker prints, wash them over with watercolor, and then make collages out of them. So, don't know if I have anything else here. Oh, piece of hardware I found on the ground. Let's see how that turns out. It didn't turn out so bad. Again, I think that was a little over inked.
Perhaps try it a little bit. There's a messing that I've got in mine.
Yeah.
Have people been able to hear me the whole time?
I can hear you fine, Diane.
Okay, because I just got a little thing saying I was muted and yes, my cat was in the background. That's Lulu. Okay, thank you. Thank you for, okay. So here is a print that I made a couple years ago using the method that we just saw. And I'm going to tell you what's in this because I actually remember. The brown squares in the back are actually the cosmetic sponge. There's a piece of the blue net is a vegetable bag. The leaves are sage leaves. And there's an onion kind of down at the bottom. You see some yellow concentric circles. And actually, I see them at the top too. That was an onion. And the black leaf in the middle and the little kind of rosy leaves around the side are actually rubber stamps I cut out of plastic erasers. So that gets a little more complex because you need something to cut into those. But it just sort of gives you an idea how you could combine different methods. That I guess that would be sort of a method of relief printing on top of a monotype. So it just sort of gives you an idea how you can combine things. Are there any questions? Oh, I see some shelf paper in the back too, those little dots. Now I can see some shelf paper. Yep. Any questions, Laura, at this
There's
point?
no questions in the chat. Just a comment from Katie. She said she loves this print.
Thank you, Katie. Yeah, it's small. It's small. It was probably about 4 by 6, I would say. Yeah, I'm thinking about 4 by 6. I think it lives somewhere else already, but thank you for asking. It probably, let me think, I made this a while ago. I'm thinking it's a combination of a stamp pad and block printing ink. Okay, we could go to, if there's no more questions, we could go to the next slide. Thanks, Bob. Okay, so here's another print, again, made from junk. Well, I wouldn't call sage leaves junk, they're sage leaves. So the trees are sage leaves. The ground is a piece of shelf paper. And the back is, I actually just painted that on, you know, and this is sort of more like, well, they're all monotypes, but I want you to particularly look at the moon in the back. That was done with something we call a mask, and we will be talking about that. But I decided to show this, and we're actually going to show this print again when we talk about that. But I wanted to show this because, again, it's using simple things to make an image. In this case, it's more of a representational image than something abstract. So it's whatever whatever delights you, whatever your thing is. We could go to the next slide, Bob. If does anybody have questions about this? Ah, okay, let's pause here for a minute. Are there any more questions, Laura?
Not in the chat.
Okay, I want to take a minute just to address, before we go on to the next thing, we said something in the description about, aside from making artwork for the sake of making artwork, if you like to make objects you could use, a lot of these pieces of paper, you're basically decorating paper. You can turn them into useful objects. And what I'm just going to do is hold up a few things. I don't know if all of you could see me as well, but I have a little ornament here. So I made a little Christmas tree ornament, and I used my little edging shears for that. With this piece of paper, I took and used some laminate on to make a coaster. And of course, you have things like, you know, bookmarkers. There's all kinds of things you can make. Another little ornament of some nature. So if your thing is really more to make something, yeah, a postcard would be great. If that's your thing, this is a great method for decorating paper as well. So any other questions so far? Because we could go on to the next.
Deborah has a question.
Okay.
She asks, do you paint first or print first?
On which one? On the one with the.
When you had that one, yeah.
Okay, so that one, I believe, it looks like the paint is underneath. So I probably, you know what I probably did? You know, I made this quite a while ago, so I don't want to make up things to you. This may have been done on a plate. I think actually this was done on an actual, like a piece of cardboard, where I glued things down and then probably masked over the leaves and then painted, and we'll talk about masks. All these techniques could be, yes, absolutely. This is a great way to build up collage papers. So yeah, so this is more done where things were put on the plate and maybe glued down. So, I mean, I guess you could call this sort of a collograph, but I really wanted to show it, to show again, it was just things that are around your house that you can make. And I wanted to show the moon because we're going to be talking about masks. And I hope that answered your question. So if there's no more questions, we can go to the next. Oh, we have a video coming up. Okay, so this is probably one of my absolute favorite things to do, string prints. So you take a string, and this is just regular kitchen twine. Of course, if you use different types of string, like a shoelace or a piece of cord or a piece of embroidery thread, you're going to get different types of marks. And the length of string you use will also make a difference. But to keep it simple, I'm just using the kitchen string. And you see, I just inked it up. Oh, we lost our video. Okay, there we go. We just ink, and I say ink, but I'm using paint. I just habitually say ink. And I laid it down. I'm not creasing the paper, but I'm holding that paper tight with my hand and pulling the string. And then we're going to see what you get. And you never know what you're going to get when you do this. You absolutely never know. So there is your mark, and it's always symmetrical. So that's kind of fun. So now I'm just going to take another color. I just picked something to contrast with that. And I think I picked up a different string. I've done this just using one string and letting the colors just all blend. That could be fun. Just laying it down any old way, pulling it. And again, you're just building and building. And you can make a whole print just using string and even just keeping it to two colors going back and forth. Again, thinking of, it's hard to know how it's going to turn out, but you could lay your string. So I build up some more and just laid the string around different parts of the paper. And that's what happened at the end of that. Very simple. Any questions about that?
No questions.
Okay. And okay, so now we're going to talk about masks and stencils. So I will, you could start the video, Bob. So everybody knows what a stencil is. I'm not going to talk too much about that, but here I just took a piece of paper and I'm making a mask and a stencil. So the part that comes out that I'm holding up, that's the mask, and this is the stencil. And again, we pretty much are familiar with stencils, but I'm going to print this one anyway, just because, but I'm not going to dwell a whole lot on it. And it probably would help if I if you want to be really careful, you could tape your stencil down or anchor it with something. I'm just trying to work very quickly. Just to give an idea. So there's our stencil of our heart. So the mask would be the next thing you could print. And there's a lot of different things you can do with masks. So I'm just now going around the edge of the mask. And I'm holding it down and just going around the edge. And this is a nice thing to do when you, on top of other textures you've made. So we've got printing the mask. And now we're going to do something a little different. We're going to take a piece of our vegetable netting and we're going to lay that down first. And then I'm going to put my stencil on top of that. And now we're going to print that. And I guess I'm only using, just to show that it works with ink pad ink. I mean, there's no reason that you can't do this with the paint we've been using, but I guess I just want to show that yes, this works fine as well with ink pad ink. And there are ways to make your own ink pad that I could talk about, but quite honestly, if you have paint with this method, you might be better off just using the paint straight, and we'll talk about that. So there's our heart as a stencil, but with some texture from a vegetable bag. I don't know whatever I'll do if they stop putting onions and potatoes in these bags, but. So now I want to show you how to use a mask. So we're taking the mask that we cut out, and I'm laying it on top of one of the prints we made earlier using the vegetables. And I'm just taking some paint and again, just going around the edge of that mask. And then when you lift up the mask, you have the textures underneath. Okay, so masks are a lot of fun. And again, you never really know what it's going to look like. Are there, okay, here's another one using mask, and I could tell you exactly how I did this. I had a piece of paper, and I do not remember if I watercolored it or just rolled out some ink on it. But basically, I put some color down on the paper for the sake of this. Let's just say I watercolored a piece of paper. And then I took 2 cutout hearts. I laid them down on the painted paper. I took a doily that I had. I inked it up in black and put that over the top. Rubbed it with a spoon because I wanted to transfer it. And I'm sure I put a piece of newspaper or something down first. And when I lifted up the doily first and then lifted up the hearts, and this is what you got. So I hope that was a clear explanation. The best way to learn this is to try it. I think you'll really enjoy using this method. Any questions, Laura?
There is a comment and a question by Campfire 30. Thank you so much for this workshop. I'm going to try all of this. I missed the demo of the very first technique. Will there be a video available of this workshop later?
I guess someone from the tech group would have to answer that.
Yes, yes, there will be a video, provided everyone is okay with that. Everyone in this Zoom is okay with that. We will make a video available. If you're not okay with that, please let us know.
Okay, no more questions.
Okay, we could go on to the next one. Okay, so I wanted to show this because it combines a lot of the things we've talked about. In the background, now this is mainly leaves that have been printed. There's not a lot of other textures other than a group of leaves. And in the background, the leaves have been printed with probably, I'm going to say ink, but again, it can be done with paint. You can see that I've used on the upper right, there is a stencil, not a stencil, a mask that I put down. And if you could, there you go. And then over on the left, there was another mask that was put down. And you could see the leaves that were used as masks were tulip tree leaves. So there's like a tulip shape. And on top of this was frittage, which was that method that, well, we call it rubbings. So here is a combination of using just plain old simple printing the texture, frittage, and masking. And there may be a little watercolor on here. And this is something I want to take a minute to talk about, is mixing media. The one thing you have to think about, if you're using water-based media, so say you are using watercolor, let's say, you know, if you do something over that, it will activate the paint again. So just think about when you use things. Now, I do use mostly oil-based media, so when it dries, it dries. And that is why I use the archival ink pads, because they're permanent. You can use regular ink pads, but if they are the ink pads that are geared for children, they are water soluble. So you just have to kind of think about, if you're combining media, what it's made of, so your image doesn't run afterwards. And I could talk about that more, but I'm pretty sure everybody watching this has made enough art that they're sort of aware of the different properties of paint and inks. Are there any questions?
Susan has a question.
Sure.
She asks, what about acrylic ink, like in the bottle?
Yeah, acrylic ink, well, once acrylic ink dries, it's set. So I would just say, make sure it's dry if you're going to watercolor on top of it, and it should be fine. But the paints I was using for my demonstrations are just Crayola. Like, again, they were very basic poster paints. So they would probably not do real well if I watercolored over them, but if you're using artist grade acrylic paints, it should be fine. Any other questions?
Not in the chat.
Okay, we could go on then, Bob, thank you. All right, I came back to this because, again, that moon at the top was a mask. So before I painted those sort of concentric areas around, there was a piece of paper there cut out as a circle. And that's why I just wanted to come back to this image to show that a mask was used to do that. I do not have the patience to paint around something and keep that nice clean shape. So I use masks a lot. I saw somebody ask something about watercolor crayon. I didn't see the whole question though.
Maybe he was referring to the previous image.
Oh, okay, all right. I don't use watercolor crayon because, again, if it gets wet, it will run. If you're not mixing media, it probably would be fine. Any other questions?
No questions.
Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about, we have another video. This is one of my favorite things to do. And I almost didn't include this. I want to thank my friend Claudia for reminding me about this. These are transfer prints, and I love to make transfer prints. And I'm showing you with an ink pad because, again, if you have an ink pad, this is a real fun thing to do. And if you don't have an ink pad, we could talk about how to do this. But I just laid a piece of paper on top of the ink pad, and I'm drawing something. Now, keep in mind that what you're drawing with will determine the character of the line. So I just have a regular number 2 pencil there. But if I were to use something thicker, the line would be thicker. You can see the little dots are where I leaned on it. They're my fingerprints. That's the drawing on the back. And this, I don't know why this fascinates me. It just does. Now I'm using the side of the pencil, but there's not a whole lot of space there. So it's not, there's my cat again. And I have a real thin pencil there, but there's not a whole lot of variation there. But you get the idea that if you try different widths of pencils, if you have some of those real fat sketch pencils, they will make a different mark than your normal number 2 pencil. And this is a transfer print. And again, I do use archival ink, which is permanent. So then I went in with watercolor afterwards on this. You can use, again, if you have stamp pads that are, you know, Crayola or children's grade, this works perfectly, but you probably then can't go into with it with watercolor. You could go into it with colored pencil or crayon or something that's not going to activate that ink again. The other way you can make these is if you do have inks and brayers, you can roll out ink and like a slab of ink, and you could do it with paint, but paint dries so quick, you'd have to work very, very fast, and you'd have to really make sure that you didn't care about that brayer, because acrylic paint will ruin a brayer. You could roll it out if you have a sponge brayer. That would work, because then you could wash out your sponge brayer. But the ink pad works great for this method. Any other questions about this?
No questions.
No questions. Okay, so the last thing we're going to talk about is embossing. Embossing is something that is very satisfying. It could be as simple or as complex as you want. Now, this is a plate that I made. The plate is just made out of cardboard. That's all this is made out of. And I had a hole puncher and a pair of scissors and glue. Okay, so that made my plate. The one thing I will have to say about making an embossed print is you do need a higher quality paper. And that is because you need something with a very high cotton content. So that is the one drawback with this. So I mean, if you're just fooling around with it, it's probably fine, but the print won't last very long if you did it, say, with a piece of computer paper. So this is the outcome of that particular plate. This is what the print looks like. They don't photograph well because there's not a lot of contrast, and well, there's just not a lot of contrast. It's just white on white. That's the plate again. And I will tell you that you could coat the plate with some matte medium if you're going to use what's called a wet technique. And I will talk about that in a second, but you could see there's some gloss in the background. The other reason it'd be good to coat your plate is if you're going to make a lot of print. So one year I did my Christmas cards. I think that's the last time I sent a Christmas card, actually, because this did me in. And I coated the plate because it was going to be used a lot. And that would be another good reason to coat the plate. So this is how you make an embossing. And again, I cut out a heart and glued it out of a piece of cardboard and glued it to another piece of cardboard. And that's a heart shape. Again, not easy to see, but take my word for it. I'm showing you different things you could use. Now, I do have a bone folder, which is what that, but I'm going to put that aside. I'm going to use, there's a palette knife, a very small palette knife, and there's a spoon. You can also use the back of a paintbrush. Make sure the back of your paintbrush is clean. That's the only thing I'm going to warn you about is, you know, so I'm using a little tiny palette knife and I'm just scoring, I'm kind of feeling along where that relief image is. And I'm just pressing the paper against, and I believe this is probably just a scrap of Arches paper I've had around. So it is a high cotton content. And I have tried to print embossings on my press. It actually works better by hand because while you can get a general impression, it cannot get into all the nooks and crannies through a press. So this truly is a hand method. So you can see the heart and the plate. And our last image here, okay, so this is also an embossed plate, and I still have this. And you see, I made this, well, yes, we're going to talk about this. Deborah just asked. This actually is a print that the paper was dampened first. This is a piece of Arches cover that I painted with watercolor. And when the paper was almost dry, I laid it on top of my plate and scored it. You will see in the corner the date of 1993. I still have that print. That shows you how long these can last. And it's in excellent shape still. So that plate that I made, I don't have the plate anymore, but I did have to coat that with some acrylic medium because I was using wet paper over it. I can recommend a few papers to use if you want to, any of the Arches cover, BFK, Arches Reeves Lightweight, and the beautiful Strathmore papers, drawing papers come in different colors. They're not cheap, but they're really beautiful. You can't wet those either. The Arches papers you can, the Strathmores you cannot, but they make absolutely beautiful prints. So I think that is actually, we are actually, this is our last slide, I believe. So we could take more questions. We could go back, and if Bob is willing, we could go back and look at some other videos again if you want. I don't know if technically we could do that, but I'll ask him if that's possible.
I'd like to chime in for a moment and
Sure.
ask our technology team if they could have Diane's website prepared and ready to show so that at some point after questions, maybe we can take a look at that.
Any questions?
Yeah. Sorry. Elke asked a question about the paper, and you may have answered this, but can you use watercolor paper for the technique you just showed?
Yes, yes, you could. I would not use a 300-pound watercolor paper because that's way too thick. But if you have some of the lower weights, that would be fine. You probably would want to dampen it. But yeah, sure. Any other questions?
Not so much a question, but a comment.
Okay.
I was just kind of amused by how many of these techniques that I've used inadvertently, just by accident. That kind of tickles me. I mean, you know, having stuff stuck under the paper that I'm drawing on, and getting an impression, or you know, accidentally getting paint on stuff and then dropping it on the paper. Fingerprints, obviously, I'm sure we've all done that.
Yeah.
So, you know, it turns out we're all very experienced printmakers. We
That's
just didn't
right.
know it.
See, and you were all born printmakers. You all have those footprints, I'm sure, somewhere. I did see somebody just asked about the feathers. Is that correct? I don't see it now, but did somebody ask about feathers?
Yeah, somebody, Ellen asked it, why are feathers illegal?
Okay, so that probably, you know, 100 years ago, let's say, hats with feathers were very popular, and a lot of birds lost their feathers due to fashion. And so it became illegal to collect bird feathers. And actually that law has never been taken off the books, even though nobody walks around with hats with feathers anymore. They've never revoked that law, so you still technically cannot collect feathers. So that is why. And I am obligated to tell you that because of my naturalist training. So.
I have a comment, Diane, which is that what you were just demonstrating to us is something that artists do. And they take their art and they combine it with something they're passionate about. And for you, it seems to be that, you know, plant life, vegetables, and even your shoe collection.
Yeah, I do love my sidewalk weeds. So.
And I think we should play a game. We should get back together at another date and play a game. Name that texture.
Yeah.
And have everybody do rubbings and see what we come up with.
So are there any other questions?
Yeah, I'll get another question. You had mentioned photographs during your presentation. If so, I think, how would you use them?
I think the only thing I said about photographs was that I had help putting my videos and photographs together. I'm not a photographer by any means, so I am not someone that could answer questions about that. There are probably ways you could transfer photographs, but I've never really played around with it. Maybe some of you have among each others. Maybe somebody else could answer that question, but I do not work with photographs. So.
Well, there are ways to transfer images. I'm not sure if that was the question.
Yeah, and maybe
transfer. Yeah. Is that the question?
I think there are ways to transfer images with, I mean, I know people have done it with Xeroxes and like acrylic medium, and I've never had any luck with it, but it can be done, and there's things you can iron with, and
yeah, the old Polaroids, you used to be able to soak them and just lift the image off the paper and transfer it to another piece of paper. And it never came out perfect, so you got that nice distortion, especially around the edges. But you know, that's an ancient and discontinued medium, unfortunately. Although there are projects to try and recreate it, somewhat successful actually.
Well, something that's related to that, I have done some of these techniques transferring photographs using exactly what you said, using acrylic medium. There are a couple ways you can do it. One where you're working with wet medium and one with dry. And you can find that information at at Golden Paints on their website. They have fabulous videos. And you can find the details on all of those techniques that use the mediums. But I just wanted to bring up one option, which is related to something that Diane showed. When she showed the Ranger archival ink, and it was a larger pad than we're used to seeing. If you actually took a photocopy of a photograph, and you laid that face up onto the ink pad and just started drawing over the dark areas, just, you know, draw over it, then it's a way to maybe transfer the idea of the image. You're not transferring the actual image, but you can use the photograph to give you the lights and darks, and it would be a type of monoprint.
Yeah, and these come in, excuse me, these come in a lot of different colors too. I just have black and brown, but they have a full palette. And you can even buy refills for these. I mean, it's like a little bottle of ink that you squirt on.
Yeah, actually, now that you mention it, you were going to talk about what to do if we don't have an ink pad.
Okay,
wanted to make
so
prints.
I mean, if you can make an ink pad at home, I would not recommend it for this technique simply because it would be a very watered down ink. But if you have, again, if you're trying to entertain children or yourself, and say you had some rubber stamps around, but you have no ink pad, you could take a kitchen sponge and wet it and squeeze it out really, really good. Squirt some paint into it, mush it around, and that kind of could make an ink pad. But again, you're not going to get a real crisp image. I would prefer using like just the paint with a stiff brush or a cosmetic sponge or something like that. But if you really want to stamp the old-fashioned way, you could try that. I've also seen people, now not everybody has felt around, but if you had a piece of felt and not a kitchen sponge, you could do that with a piece of felt as well. That actually might even be a little more successful because it won't hold as much water. But again, a lot of people don't have felt sitting around their house. They probably have a sponge. So oddly, I have felt, but no sponges. So go figure. Yeah,
So if we don't have a whole lot of questions coming up at this point, I wonder, do we have Diane's website available?
Yeah, hold on a sec.
I've seen Diane's work, and I'm thinking that by looking at her work, we'll see ways to apply some of the techniques that you talked about. And I also want to draw attention to the home project. Diane, can you describe that? Because that's kind of like a community project.
okay. The home project, and I think that's stored on the blog somewhere at this point. It's kind of hard to describe. So Bob, if you hit the blog and in the search box, if you put in the cookie cutter house project, if you were to put that in the search area up top where the little magnifying glass is, type in cookie cutter house project, because that'll bring up that page and then people could see it and get a better sense of it. There you go. So if you go down a little, let's take a look at somebody's project. And I'll tell you what, there is at the very bottom, the second is Alice Sudduth. She's a friend of mine. I think she's on today. Let's look at Alice's house. So let me talk about this project. I moved here 4 years ago, and I struggled a lot with the idea of what does home mean, because I've never lived anywhere else. So I decided to throw the question out to the people at large. So who better than a group of artists? So what I asked is a bunch of people if they wanted to participate in a project, and we called it the Cookie Cutter House Project. And the people who did, everybody received a cutout. Actually, they got two, I think at least two cutouts of a house shape, of just a plain house shape. And it measured about 6 by 8. And what I asked them to do was give me their idea of home. And they needed to paint that image or whatever, however they did it, and then write a little paragraph. And then as each one was done, they just emailed. I didn't actually ever have the physical houses back. They emailed me a digital image of their project and wrote what home was to them. So this is my friend Alice's, and that wonderful tree in the back, she unfortunately lost, I think a week or two later, came down in a storm. But she talks about her idea of what home is. And I think we had about 18 or 20 artists participate in this. Some people I never met. There was a woman in Canada who I never met, but through the blog got involved. We had people from several states, from North Carolina, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New Hampshire, Ohio, Virginia. It was really a fun project, and you could go through and Bob, if you want to click on another one of these, so people could see, I'm sorry, there's another, Sheldon Strober is a member of the Plastic Club, so his right above Alice. And this is Sheldon's, which is a wonderful collage. And what I thought was very clever about this is, well, I think the painting, no, it's probably, I'm not sure I have to really think about how he did this. But Sheldon has bought and renovated a lot of houses, and he does a beautiful job, and his homes are beautiful. So he made a Monopoly board, which I just thought was extremely clever. And that was his concept of home, how he buys these properties and makes them into something wonderful. And yeah, so the things we got back were just really, really very, very diverse. There's another one on here where the person, like I said, I mailed at least 2 to everybody because I figured if they messed up one, they had another one. So there's a gentleman named Mark Young. He's 2 above Sheldon, Bob. There you go. Now this is very interesting to me. You have to go to the bottom, and it's a video. Mark took both houses together, and you have to play the video, and I hope it works on this. Mark is a pastor, so he moves around a lot. So he made a mobile he just put the 2 houses together and wrote ideas of home. The place was to, because he moved so much, being a Methodist pastor. I thought that was really clever. Any questions about this project? And this does live on my site, so you could look at each entry and read about what that person said. I guess there's Mark helping it go. And I've collaborated with Mark on a few things. He's a lot of fun to work with.
Thank you, Diane. That was really interesting. And I think this is probably a good point to make a suggestion to folks. These techniques, as you can see, they work really well for small pieces, and they work really well for postcards. And some of us are doing just friendship exchanges where one of us sends a postcard to the second person. The person who sends it starts an image. They send it to a friend, and they finish the image and then put it in an envelope and mail it back to the sender to keep. And so with these postcards going back and forth, it's a wonderful way to keep us entertained. It's a wonderful way to keep our hands in the paint or in the ink. And it's a wonderful way to keep up with friends. And they're also dated. It's an opportunity to actually write something that is capturing what's happening today in our world. So it's really ripe with opportunity. And I think that the techniques that you showed us today are really perfect to make interesting images that are also can be very meaningful. And I think another thing to say about today is you've given us a new way to look at the world around us. As you said, we can be texture detectives. You know, we can look at just anything that's within our sights and see it as something to make art with. So it's a way really to connect with our own immediate world. And you know, that's a gift that you've given us today, you know, just to kind of have new eyes for the things that we live with. But anyway, it was a wonderful presentation. And I think that what I saw was that that you gave the presentation, you know, taking out questions, maybe it was an hour. And that was a very rich hour of your time. And I know it took many hours to put together. And I know you had great help with your husband and the tech team on board. You know, so it took a lot of work to put it together, and we just so appreciate it. You're keeping the Plastic Club alive during lockdown. And again, if other folks who are on today have any ideas of what they'd like to see or what they'd like to present, you know, contact us and we'll see if we can make it happen. So with that, I think we can wrap up. Is there anything more?
Yeah, I just want to thank all of you for having me, and I want to thank Laura, Tina, Bob, and Susan for all the work they put into this with me. And if anybody thinks of something after the fact, you can contact me. I'll be more than happy to answer your questions. So you could contact me through the website. And I will do my best to answer whatever it is you want to know. But I thank you for having me today.
And thank you, Diane. And just so you know, Diane is, she's so multi-talented and she knows so much about so many topics that we're actually talking to her about a presentation that would come later on a different topic. So that's in the works, so stay tuned, check the website. Or, you know, what's even better than that is to get on our mailing list. Go to the website and get on our mailing list, and then you'll get the updates as things happen with all the links. Otherwise, most of the links are posted through the website or at plasticclub.org/Zoom. You can find most things there.